So we basically broke today up into 3/3. The first bit was kind of setting the scene along broadly speaking, along what we're talking about with business growth and transition. And then we wanted to bring the whole land leasing exercise in and the specifics of what John's been dealing with. So now what I'm doing is I'm heading towards the close, which is actually saying, well, all of these are really lovely ideas, but what do we do to actually make it work? Given that what we've done is we've put ourselves into the mindset of thinking about creating a high-performing, self-managing, saleable business. And so it helps us think differently about the mechanics of how we're going to do all these things. So I guess I'm still about the notion of managing the business transition. So we've moved away from the idea of this takes us to the next slide. We're still staying away from the train wreck, and we're focusing very much on this whole concept of grooming the business. So how are we actually going to set up this higher performing business? So we've got some key concepts built around my 12 pillars, built around the approach that Anthony took with his orderly succession business transition process, around the collaborative farming model, and around the land leasing. So I just want to take us back to that, because we've been talking unknowingly in the last few minutes, or in the last session, about our product. So one of our products could be our land, available to somebody else, or something that sets us apart because of the land that we've got, which we can use for something different. So that's about the value of the business. So we always go back to the notion of sustainability. So I've got a background long time ago in land care. So I had a sort of a grounding in that ages ago, where we always talked about the sustainability of the resource. And it always struck me that we should also be talking about the sustainability of the people and the money. And so that's what we want to bring into this. So what underpins this is the sustainability of the land, I know, but basically my interest is in the people who are running the business, and therefore the profitability of their enterprise and the capacity for the long-term plan to occur. So fundamentally, this is about the business and personal sustainability. You think of going back to my pillar number 1. So whatever vision we've got for the business has to meet our needs. That's its purpose. We're not running our lives for the business, surprisingly. The objective is that the business is our vehicle to create the life that we desire, if I go up to that philosophical level. So as we're looking at this business transition, we're now thinking about the current circumstances, and then we're thinking about the future circumstances. And in the case of our motivation for being here today, for some of us, it's we want to get the next generation involved in our business. I still take the view that that has to be an investment-based decision. So it might be getting an investor from outside of our immediate circle to invest in the business, or we might be getting the next generation to invest in our business in some way, shape or form. But the last thing we want to need, and I think it might have been Rosemary who did ask the question before about what happens when our superannuation is tied up in the business, or maybe it was a discussion over lunch, I can't recall. But it's thinking about what is the generation who's worked hard in this business now, whatever the business is going to be. We need to protect their interests so that in the future they have the capacity to live the life they lead. At the same time, bringing the next generation or the next group of people or beneficiaries of this business into the business so they get out of it what they want. And one would hope and expect, where I come from, it's about a business growth process as well as a business transition. So that's really what that's all about. Needs of the current generation, needs of the future. So what drives this? So I guess we're now starting to repeat some of the key things that have emerged out of as the discussion has unfolded today. So basically we're wanting to work closely with all the people who are involved in this process so we understand their needs and motivations. So this is less, it's certainly head stuff, but it's also heart and emotion type stuff, because there are often emotional drivers in this whole process. And you might remember earlier it took me 3 months to get out of the minds of the father what his real motivation was in the business transition, and it was quite scary. But when I finally got to it, it was just this whole emotional outpouring of stuff. And until we got that emotional outpouring of stuff out on the table, we didn't actually know what we were dealing with. So that he had certain motivations, his son had completely different desires, but we actually had to put them together into a package. So this whole transition process is very much evolutionary, and so we've talked consistently this morning about having enough time. The last thing we need to do is to be jammed for time, because that's when we hit all of these emotional roadblocks and we've got nowhere to go except go pear-shaped, and that's the one thing that we don't want to do. So it's about allowing that process to evolve, but it's actually creating it in as orderly a fashion as we possibly can. So we're back to this idea of transitioning of wealth. So I guess our motivation is we're creating a high-performing, self-managing, profitable, saleable business. Why? To generate whatever the wealth is that's required. So that might be monetary wealth, it might be emotional wealth, for example, the capacity of people to travel, the capacity of people to live a different life. So I've been involved in people who say, look, actually I need to leave agriculture because there's other stuff I need to do with my life. In fact, there was another intergenerational exercise that we did where one of the brothers said, look, I'm a very religious person. The whole family was very religious. It's time for me to give back to my God and my Christian community. So I actually have to leave this business to go off and do that, because that's a personal motivation I have. So it wasn't up to me as the person facilitating that process to have any value judgment around that whatsoever. That was his motivation. Other people in the family respected it. We had to make that all happen. So harmony, individual growth, contribution, and the win-win-win. So again, we're all about the people stuff. And I put the triple win in there because when I wear my sort of customer hat, I'm thinking I always want the customer to win. I always want the supplier of the product to win, and I also want the person in the middle to win. So it's about the whole win-win thing, which I think has been emerging quite strongly out of the conversation today. And as Tanthony said, be generous. So now we're back to the paperwork. I guess the recurring theme throughout everything that I've covered off today has been often things are not real until they're written down. As I said earlier, when I'm acting as the chairman of the board, I say to people, if I'm the chairman and the secretary and everything, which I'm often sort of doing that role, and even if there is a secretarial person there, I say the words I'm about to ask this person or I'm about to write down are these. So it's at that point that we either reach agreement or we have to keep on clarifying, so that when we actually write the words down, we get clear. So as individuals, often we're out in the paddock and we have thoughts about stuff, or we're rattling around the house doing stuff, and until we actually sit down and write something out and then sort of re-look at what those words say, or get somebody else to read the words. Whoever mentioned this morning, might have even been John earlier, who said often when you go to a meeting, take several people and they will listen to the words that are spoken with a completely different interpretation, which is one reason why I'm so keen on the idea of writing things down, which is why we've always got our long-term plan. So I like the idea of the 5-year plan. We work to a thing called the 180-day plan, so that's actually a 6-month plan, which is our operational plan for the next 6 months, which fits in with our strategic operational plan, and then the money side of it fits into that as well. And you're probably going, my God, all this writing that you're talking about, Gordon. Well, the first lot of writing, in my view, is somewhat complicated because it actually takes you time to work out your 5-year plan and work out what do I really want, what do other people in the business really want, what do the other financial stakeholders really want. Once we get that clear, and we can create what we call SMART outcomes, so that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-bound. But that's all about making things very specific about the outcomes that we want. You can work back from that and say, okay, our intention is in 5 years that we want to do this. We want to have a business that looks like that. We want the freedom to do this, or we want to build a business like that, or we want to get involved elsewhere in the value chain like that, or we want to get out of the business like this. Things will be starting to become clear. Then you can break it down into all these bite-sized chunks. And then, as I said earlier this morning, you can measure your success and say, okay, well, what we set out to achieve in the year 2017 was this, because by the year 2020, we want this to happen. So let me just think. So if I use my hypothetical family from this morning, So father's 62, wife who's 60, son who's 29, the nutritionist who's coming into the business. So what the father wants to do is he still wants to be in the production game in 5 years' time. But he doesn't want to be cattle trading, which is what he's doing now. In 5 years' time, he wants to be supplying high quality meat into the hospitality sector. And what his wife wants to do is to have all the kids in the business, and what she wants is more time. She wants him off the tools and out there doing stuff, travelling and things along those lines that happen to fit with building this high performing business. What the son wants in 5 years is to actually have this business. So they want to have the second property operating. They want a whole heap of drought-proof feeding programs in place. They actually want a butcher shop so that they can process their meat and keep control of the processing mechanics, so that they can actually have control of the value chain, and possibly the daughter coming into the business to help with the marketing. And that's their 5-year plan that I've kind of summarised to you. So what do they want to do in year 2017? They want to have acquired the second block. They want the investor who's investing in the business. They want the son to come into the business. They want the father to have a $100,000 salary or something along those lines. They want the son to have a $100,000 salary coming out of the business, and sundry other things. So we've got a 6-month plan and another 6-month plan in 2017. And already they've achieved a number of those bits and pieces of the steps to get there. So that's the reason why I'm talking about all of these sorts of things. So it's summarised in, we've got a clear vision of where things are going to go to the future, of what people want. I had it up on here on the board. What do people really want? What do they really, really want? And what do they really, really, really want? That's the question that's often asked. And only at that point do you get to that the father wanted to screw over his son. That's actually what he really, really, really wanted. That was his fundamental motivation. I couldn't believe it when it appeared, but that's what his motivation was. And I thought, well, we've really, really got to get this sorted out. But I won't tell you the rest of the story because it ended up in a partial train wreck, and then it ended up in a planned owner exit strategy that had to be done quickly because the bank said, this is a very, very untidy process. We actually see the future of this business, but it has to change because we can't have all of this fighting going on in the business. So that the bank's actually stepped in. So, because you don't want that to happen. But okay, so you have to get clear on what's currently going on, what you want in the short term, what you want in the long term, and how it's all going to fit together. Okay, so what are some of the tools? So we've talked about this idea of the advisory board at a family level or a mini sort of a corporate level. So it can be an advisory board or even a governance board. And I think by now you've already got the view that what's emerging out of this is sometimes it's very valuable to have the independent person helping to get the story straight amongst the key players in the business. Sometimes the role of the advisory board is to, all the time, it's to keep everything on the straight and narrow. Often it's to look at the financials. Often you get somebody with the right accounting or financial expertise involved in that to support this side, compliance, to even think about this internal or external business benchmarking, which is how am I going against the financial indicators that I've set for myself. If you want to do external business benchmarking, how am I going against my peers? Strategic business development. So I've put international in there quite advisedly because there are many younger people who are coming into businesses now who are seeing the global marketplace and thinking, well, what global opportunities are there? Can I find some premium niche market opportunities or whatever it may be? Do I stay in the commodity market? Do I look at these niche markets? International, domestic, all those sorts of things. Which leads us back to this notion here because there are government R&D incentives to support innovation. And so the question is, how can we take advantage of some of those to help us change our business? It goes without saying, financials, and what fundamentally is the financial position we want in the future. So if we're thinking about the value proposition around all of this, if we are thinking of business growth, business transition, or we're thinking about succession in some way, shape or form, if succession is the ultimate outcome that we want, then we have all of these different plans that sit down, but we have to be clear about what our vision is, what the various bits and pieces of a planned attack are going to be, and think around some of these golden rules, which are self-apparent because they keep on coming up every time as the day goes on. How do we collaborate? How do things evolve over time? How do we look for that win-win opportunity? And how is this transition process actually going to happen? And then ultimately, unless you plan the implementation, it can still go off the rails, which is why I was back to the comments I made first up this morning about the idea of defining what specific steps are required in the future, agreeing on that with all of the key people who are involved, who could make a difference to the change process, and then looking back at what we've achieved, looking forward to what we want to achieve, celebrate success, and keep on the change process. And above all, communication. So some of the things to be aware of. I guess we're all aware that in the agriculture sector, broadly speaking, there is an older business workforce. At the same time now, I'm surprised how many younger professional people with a professional mindset who think about professional development, who think about getting an education, are now coming back into the sector and are saying, this is a really exciting place to be. Like we had some kind of an old school mentality some years ago, but that seems to be changing quite markedly. To the extent that you've got young people who've left farms who are coming home, or agri enterprises who are coming back into the business, bringing with them a professional mindset. People from outside of agriculture saying this is an exciting place to be. It's got this kind of vibrancy about it. It's about the food and fibre sector because we now value our food. We now value high quality fibres. How can I as a professional young person get involved? And then there are all these high net worth individuals who are in Australia and globally who are saying, actually, I'd like a slice of the action. I've got this money sitting around here that I would like to do something with. Where can I go and park it? And I've got some values and beliefs around the value of supporting the agriculture sector, because we've got this kind of psyche and built into Australia's psyche about the value of agriculture and the fact that most people in the agri sector are fundamentally good people and fundamentally are doing something absolutely critical to us, which of course is feeding us and clothing us. And so there are these high net worth individuals who are saying, look, as long as I can get a return on my investment, it fits my ethos. I've actually got one of my sons was an investment banker, now moved into the whole private equity space in Sydney. And it's really intriguing to hear him talk to his mates, particularly the girls, who just say, it's so exciting the stuff that these people are involved in the food and fibre sector, the agriculture sector of today. And I'm quite intrigued actually as I listen to them talk. And there's this kind of enthusiasm and buzz. So you think, well, how can we take advantage of that buzz and opportunity? So the question around descendants then is quite important. If we don't have the descendants who are prepared to come into our business, if we're looking at it from a succession perspective, who else might be there out there who is actually interested in being an investor of some sort in the business? If we do have descendants, we've already discussed this from the land leasing point of view, do they have available money? And if they don't, how do we get the equity or the finance to help this investment in the business? And we keep on talking about having enough time. And I guess we need to be aware too of the current marketplace, which I guess most of us who are involved with banks and so on are increasingly aware of. So banks are increasingly risk averse. So they're increasingly wanting a due diligence process. What they love is the idea of somebody coming up to them with a well thought out plan. So our hypothetical family, or now a real family that I've used as my hypothetical, have gone back to the bank with this information memorandum, which is very clear and succinct. It includes all the financial projections and things like that. So why was it easy for them to get money to buy the adjacent property? Because the bank actually, I wouldn't go so far as to say the bank signed up to the vision, but the bank's level of view of the level of risk was diminished because everything was clearly set out. And I guess and I'm no banker, and it's to some extent outside of my expertise, but from everywhere I talk to the people around us who are involved in the money game, the days of the friendly bank manager are pretty much gone. It's the guy who sits in the back room who gets all the data and sticks it into his little number crunching thing, and the answer spits out yes, no or maybe. And so our whole objective is to give that person, the faceless person, the good story where they can go, okay, look, it's a maybe, but I'm going to push it towards the yes, because this is clearly an organised approach that these people are taking. So we've talked about that in environmental due diligence as well. More documentation, more valuation, more advice. So I guess the recurring theme about this today has been, as we're thinking about the high-performing business growth or high-performing business of the future, thinking about business growth and business transition, if we can get specialist advice that is relevant and purposeful for our needs, most beneficial. Again, time. The big four: plan, measure, manage, and look at the accountability processes. I guess that's all pretty much self-explanatory, except one of the reasons that we talk about the notion of the advisory board is that every month there's a reporting process, or every quarter there's a board. And there's nothing like understanding human nature to go, well, if I've got a board meeting coming up this month and I'm supposed to report on how our numbers of livestock are going, how we're going engaging with certain customers, what our return on investment is, what our connections with other stakeholders in the game might be, then human nature being what it is, I will actually report on that even if it's the night before or the 3 days before. So it actually it has the effect of keeping us focused on our main game, because as human beings we get so carried away with working in the business that we forget to work on the business. So what this process is about is helping us work on the business by default. It's self-management. Assisting us with changing and adapting to changing circumstances. Think of things like professional development. So in a few minutes, we're going to talk about some of the programs that John and I and Heather are involved in. We actually run a thing called the CEO Mentoring Program, which happens to be supported by Meat and Livestock Australia and the donor company, and also by the Leading Sheep Program. So I guess we're just making you aware that some of these opportunities do exist, and this is an opportunity for professional development. More particularly, it's about helping us get an education about the things that we need to do differently and better. And I always put this down the bottom: become the educated outsider looking in. So I guess what our intention for today has been is to help you step back from your business for a day, look at all of these concepts that we have put to you, become the outsider looking in and looking at your business and going, what could I do differently? How does my business shape up? Is it achieving the outcomes that I want it to? What do I need it to do? What do I need it to do differently to do what I want it to do for me? Or how am I going to manage this tiger that I've got by the tail? So if you've been able to step back and then look dispassionately at what's going on and then go, what do I need to do to rectify it? And how can I put in place the plans to do it? Then we've achieved something quite valuable. And again, that's what we do with this program here. Now, I just wanted to cover this one off, because the recurring theme from me has been it's all about the people. So I'm sure many of you have heard about Myers-Briggs, which is understanding your personality style. And you will understand if you've done any of the Myers-Briggs, or in our case, we use the extended DISC program, which I'll just explain in a minute. It's about this idea of self-understanding of what we do well and what we don't do so well. So I've talked already today about our strengths and our weaknesses. So most of us are very strong in a number of key areas, often 3 or 4, and we're weak in other areas. So what we're looking at from the point of view of a high-performing team for our high-performing business, which might be our family members, is to look at the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals in our families. So what is a dominant person? The dominant person is often that person who just goes out there, they've got a big picture, they want to get there no matter what. It doesn't matter who gets in their road, they're just going to bash them all out of the way. They're often risk takers, and often they just like very clear goals and they just want to get there fast. So I've got a guy in our team who says, I'm a bullet point kind of guy. And I just go until I get to the bullet. And so I just watch him bash things out of the road, and sure, he gets there, but there's a bit of carnage on the way. So I actually then have to manage the carnage because I'm a combination of a number of these characteristics. So the thing is, if you want stuff done, he'll go and do it, no question about it. But you just got to be aware of the trade-off with the carnage. So each of these characteristics has got serving and non-serving sides to them, each of these behavioural types. So in his particular case, the non-serving side of it is the carnage. The serving side is he'll get there fast. Influencing people, they're the ones that you see at parties who are very gregarious. They like to get out there and have a chat to the whole world and find out what's going on. Not necessarily get stuff done, they just like to engage and connect with all sorts of other people because they love lots of communication. They like to be free from sort of conflict and all that sort of thing. They like to connect with others and create a positive atmosphere, and everything feels great. They're often the creative people that you see in PR agencies and so on like that, who just like to engage with other people and, broadly speaking, get stuff done. And they probably need the odd dominant person in there as well, because they're not so good at actually hitting things up and making them happen. Sometimes they would need a steady sort of a person in there, and they're often the people that we find who love being part of a team. They don't like too much stuff getting in their road because they like to focus on what they're doing. They like things to be fairly predictable. And so you'd probably be thinking, well, that sounds like a whole heap of accountancy practices, and you could well be right. But the problem is that they'll just take forever to get stuff done. But if you want stuff done and done well, they'll be the sort of people who'll do it. These are the people, the conscientious people, who like to kind of work independently of other people. They just like to kind of do their own thing, often as long as they've got quite clear ground rules. They like things to be logical and organised, but ask them to do this kind of strategic stuff and they go, oh no, I'm not going to do that stuff. I just like to be contained in my own little area. So I'm not saying that this is the be-all and end-all, because when you start to look in this extended DISC profile process, you find all sorts of characteristics that start to emerge. But if you were to look at those behavioural characteristics, could you see a number of people who fit in the agricultural sector, who are particularly people who are involved in livestock and grain and things like that, who just like to get on a horse or a tractor or a motorbike, get away, get stuff done, not engage with too many other people, and just do things at their own pace in a reasonably orderly fashion. So it may be that they're not necessarily the best people if they have to go off and engage with somebody in the marketplace or a customer. Because for some of those people, it's just like, I don't actually like people all that much. Pardon me, I've got a couple of them in my family, so I know how it works. But then you stick somebody like me on them, on the customer, and I'm more than happy to go out there. I'm the sort of person that we were talking about before, who'll just drive up a driveway and say, mate, I want to find out if you've got any adjustment here. Oh, you don't? Okay, next. So, and the Ds, they're the ones who are definitely happy to go up the driveway, but the thing is, they'll have a 5-minute conversation. If there's no adjustment, it'll be, I'm out the door and I'm gone. Whereas I'll build my relationships, I'll be a bit more like the influencing person. So what this little soliloquy of mine is about is just to give you some insights into that. If you're going to build a high-performing business, if you're going to go through a business growth or business transition process, it might be important to think about having a range of those behavioural characteristics in your team. And if you don't, it may be possible to go out and acquire some advisors and other people who do have those characteristics. Because if you're somewhat in this category, you might be able to do like I did up on the board here before and just say, that's what I know, there's some of the questions I've got, They're the things I don't know. So where do I find the group of people who will help me make that all work? So we talked with Heather about explaining what we do with this CEO mentoring program, which, as I said, there's an MLA and a leading sheep component to it, which is actually a heavily subsidised program. But our focus is actually on this grooming the business. That's what we're on about. We're actually getting people to step back outside their business, become the outsider looking in, and say, what do I need to do differently through changing our business. It's about a proactive approach. It's about the high-performing, self-managing, scalable business. That's our objective, and it fits around those 12 pillars of business best practice. So that's just reiterating what the discussion today was all about: a planned and disciplined approach from my perspective. Having a short-term plan, unfortunately it requires brain power and the will to change. My focus is on the value of the business and thinking about who's coming on behind us that we can actually get to make things happen for us.